After 3 decades of marriage, Evelyn never thought the sharpest wound would come from her own blood. It wasn't the husband who first silenced her voice, it was the family she had built, the children she had carried, the people she sacrificed everything for. One evening, when the house still smelled faintly of Sunday roast and the television hummed in the background, she found the courage to speak. Her voice didn't tremble. She simply said the word she had rehearsed 1,000 times in silence: divorce. But instead of comfort or understanding, the response came like a blade. Her husband leaned back, smirking, as if she were a foolish child. Her son crossed his arms, his jaw clenched in disdain. Her daughter looked away, embarrassed. Then came the sentence that cut deeper than betrayal itself: know your place. Shut up. Don't disgrace this family. In that moment, Evelyn understood the truth. Her pain was never meant to be acknowledged. Her sacrifices were invisible, her voice disposable, her life nothing more than a backdrop for theirs. But what they didn't know, what they would soon learn, is that she had finally reached the point of no return. She would no longer beg for respect in a house built on silence. She would no longer be chained by their expectations. They told her to stay quiet. Instead, she vowed to show them exactly who she was. And from that vow, a story of revelation, betrayal, and unstoppable freedom began. For most of her life, Evelyn had been the kind of woman who filled the silence with service. She wasn't loud. She wasn't demanding. She carried the weight of her family the way oak trees carry centuries of storms, quietly, without asking for thanks. At 59, her days followed a rhythm that no longer belonged to her. Breakfast before sunrise. Groceries done on Thursdays. Sunday dinners that stretched late into the evening because her husband insisted on keeping tradition, even if he never lifted a finger. She had raised 2 children, Caleb and Sarah, pouring every ounce of herself into their futures. She sewed costumes for school plays, sat awake through nights of fevers, and clipped coupons so their college tuition could be paid on time. Her husband, Mark, taught at the local community college and wore his status like armor. He liked to say Evelyn didn't need to worry about understanding the world because he had already taken care of that for her. It was true, Evelyn rarely traveled, rarely saw beyond the streets of her town. Her world was her home, and her home was her prison. She once dreamed of visiting the coasts, of walking under city lights, of standing in places where no one knew her name. But each time the idea surfaced, Mark had a way of extinguishing it with a single remark. Why waste money? You wouldn't appreciate it anyway. And so she learned to tuck her desires into corners, to swallow her longings whole, to smile when there was nothing left to smile about. Her children grew up seeing her not as a woman with her own voice, but as an extension of their father's authority. And without realizing it, they adopted his gaze, the gaze that saw her as background, never center stage. But what no one knew, not Mark, not Caleb, not even Sarah, was that the silence had been wearing thin. And the night she said the word divorce was not the beginning of her rebellion. It was simply the moment she decided she would no longer hide it. Mark sat at the kitchen table pretending to read the paper, though Evelyn noticed he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Caleb had left early, leaving behind an unwashed plate smeared with ketchup, as if she were still his maid. Sarah's footsteps lingered upstairs, pacing, then pausing, too cautious to face her mother after siding with silence. Evelyn poured herself a cup of coffee, her hand steady though her chest burned. She had said the forbidden word. Divorce. And once spoken, it lingered in the air like smoke that no one could clear. By noon, she picked up the small, unused suitcase that had sat in the closet for years. She had bought it on sale 2 decades ago, telling herself she'd use it when Mark finally agreed to take her somewhere new. But he never did. The suitcase became a relic, a reminder of promises postponed until they faded. This time, she didn't ask permission. She didn't even announce it. She pulled her old leather wallet from the drawer, tucked in a few $100s she had hidden away, and closed the zipper. Her destination wasn't far, just 2 towns over, to a place she had heard women at church whisper about. A weekend retreat for those who wanted to breathe again. At first she thought it sounded foolish, indulgent, but now the word breathe felt like salvation. When the bus rolled into the station, Evelyn chose a window seat and pressed her palm to the glass. The familiar streets blurred into unfamiliar roads lined with fields and autumn trees. For the first time in years, she felt distance from the kitchen table, from Mark's dismissive smirk, from her children's hollow stares. That evening, she walked through the doors of the retreat lodge, greeted by the soft scent of cedar and the sound of strangers laughing freely, unafraid of being overheard. It was unsettling, almost jarring, to step into a world where voices weren't silenced. And though she didn't know it yet, this small act, this choice to leave her house even for 2 days, would become the first crack in the foundation of a marriage built on her silence. The journey that began with a suitcase would lead her to the discovery that would change everything. On the second afternoon of the retreat, the group leader encouraged everyone to take a walk through town. "Let your feet guide you," she said. "Sometimes the soul finds answers where you least expect them." Evelyn wandered down a quiet street lined with antique stores and second-hand bookshops. She paused at the corner of a small brick building with lace curtains in the windows and a wooden sign that read, "Memories and Keepsakes." Something about the name pulled her in. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Rows of postcards, journals, and letters filled every corner, each one preserved as if the past itself had been carefully bottled. Evelyn trailed her fingers along the shelves until she stopped at a glass case near the back. That was when she saw it. A yellowed envelope, framed and labeled 1996. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, the kind of script she had watched Mark use 1,000 times when signing bills or grading papers. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer. On the front, the words were clear as if written yesterday. For Linda. May this city always remind us of the life we could have had. Mark. Her chest tightened. Linda. A name she had never spoken aloud but had always sensed in the shadows of her marriage. She pressed her palm against the glass, reading the words again and again, her pulse thundering in her ears. Beneath it were 2 more envelopes, each dated years apart. One in 2005. Another in 2017. All signed the same way. All addressed to the same woman. Her mind reeled back to those very years. In 1996, she had been in the hospital with Sarah, who was battling a terrifying fever. Mark claimed he had been away at a conference. In 2005, she had stood alone at Caleb's school ceremony while Mark excused himself for research. In 2017, she remembered the empty Christmas Eve, when he disappeared with no explanation. Each envelope lined up perfectly with her loneliness. Every absence. Every unanswered question. The shopkeeper noticed her expression and smiled faintly. Those belonged to a professor. He and the woman he loved used to leave letters here every time they visited. It was their tradition. Her knees nearly buckled. Tradition. While she had carried the weight of a family, while she had silenced her own longings, Mark had been building another life, one sealed in envelopes and left on display for strangers. The betrayal was no longer invisible. It was written in ink. Preserved like a relic. And staring at those letters, Evelyn realized the truth. Her silence had not been protection. It had been permission. That night, Evelyn returned home earlier than planned. The bus ride felt endless, every bump on the road pressing her deeper into the ache of what she had seen. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, holding the weight of 3 decades and 3 letters that explained it all. When she stepped into the house, the living room was glowing with the blue light of the television. Caleb was sprawled on the couch, half asleep, a slice of pizza sliding from the box onto the floor. He blinked when he saw her suitcase. "Where were you?" he asked lazily. "Dad's been asking." She didn't answer him. She walked past, straight into the kitchen. Mark was there, pouring himself a glass of bourbon, his back stiffening when he heard her keys drop into the bowl. "Well," he muttered without turning around, "look who decided to come home. Did you have fun playing tourist?" Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut the air. I went to Memories and Keepsakes. That little shop you once mentioned. Do you remember it? He froze. Just for a second. His hand tightened around the glass. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his tone flat. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes locked on him. 1996, 2005. 2017, 3 envelopes. All signed with your name. All written to Linda. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt alive. Mark turned slowly, his face pale, his mouth twitching into something between a smirk and a grimace. You're imagining things, he said finally. Linda was just an old friend. We wrote to keep in touch, that's all. Caleb had wandered into the kitchen now, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowing at his mother. Mom, he said firmly, don't start. You always take things too far. Dad's a good man. He never cheated. You're making drama out of nothing. Evelyn's gaze darted from her son to her husband. The two of them, standing there together, speaking the same language of dismissal. Her chest burned. Her jaw clenched. Drama, she whispered. Is that what you call decades of lies? Caleb stepped forward, his tone sharp. Dad worked hard for this family. He put food on the table, gave us a good name. And you, he shook his head, his voice dripping with irritation, you've always been too emotional. You can't let go of the past. That's your problem. Mark leaned back against the counter, sipping his bourbon as if the conversation bored him. Exactly, he muttered. You're blowing this out of proportion, Evelyn. You always do. She looked at them both, her husband with his practiced indifference, her son with his inherited arrogance. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. For years, she had been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the woman who swallowed her own hurt to keep the family intact. But staring at their faces, she finally understood, her silence had been their weapon. And this time, she would not be silenced. The house was unbearably still after her words, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. Mark returned to his drink, pretending to be unbothered. Caleb muttered under his breath and stomped back toward the living room, the slam of the remote against the coffee table echoing through the house. Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply turned and walked upstairs. For years she had avoided Mark's office, his sanctuary, his untouchable kingdom. He had always warned her to stay out. Don't move my things. Don't disturb my work. But tonight, that warning was nothing more than another chain he had wrapped around her. And chains were meant to be broken. She opened the door. The air was stale, heavy with the faint smell of ink and dust. Books stacked in uneven towers lined the desk, but what caught her eye was the bottom drawer, the one she had seen him lock countless times. She pulled at the handle. Locked. Her hands shook as she searched through the clutter on top of the desk. Receipts. Loose coins. A cracked fountain pen. Then, small and ordinary, the brass key she had always assumed belonged to nothing important. She slid it into the lock. It turned with ease. Inside was a stack of files and, beneath them, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was smooth, worn at the edges, like something cherished for decades. She held it in her hands, her breath shallow. Slowly, she opened it. The first page stopped her cold. To the one I could never name out loud. Her stomach twisted. The handwriting was Mark's, clear and deliberate. She turned the pages. One by one, each entry sliced through her like glass. 1992, if you had been there on my wedding day, I would have chosen you without hesitation. 1996, every trip with you reminds me what real love feels like. 2005, the life I live is not the life I want. But at least we have this. 2017, 3 decades, and my heart is still yours. No one else compares. Her throat tightened, her vision blurring, but she kept reading. Line after line. Year after year. Not a single mention of her, of the woman who had built his home, raised his children, carried his burdens. The journal was not a record of their marriage, it was a shrine to another woman. A noise behind her made her snap the book shut. Caleb was standing in the doorway, his expression caught between curiosity and disdain. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. Evelyn turned the journal toward him, her hand steady despite the tremor in her voice. "Do you see this? Do you still think I'm making drama out of nothing?" He stepped closer, glanced at the pages, then shrugged, his voice cool. "Mom. Dad always said she was the one that got away. You've got to understand, they had something special. You and him, you were different. Practical. Necessary. But her? She was his passion." The word struck harder than any slap. Practical. Necessary. Not loved. Not chosen. Just tolerated. Evelyn closed the journal and clutched it to her chest. For years she had feared she wasn't enough. Now she knew. And that knowing didn't break her, it burned through her, searing away every excuse she had ever made for him, every silence she had ever accepted. She walked past her son without another word. For the first time, she wasn't the one who needed to explain. Evelyn carried the journal downstairs, her footsteps deliberate, each one echoing like a countdown. Mark was still in the kitchen, nursing the same glass of bourbon, the television buzzing faintly in the background. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't need to. The weight of the leather-bound book in her hand spoke louder than anything she could say. She set it down on the table between them with a soft thud. The sound made him glance over, his eyes narrowing. He saw the cover, the edges worn from years of secrecy. For the first time that night, the mask on his face faltered. "You went through my things," he muttered, his voice low, defensive. Evelyn's voice was steady, almost too calm. "I went through the life you never shared with me. 30 years of pretending I was your partner, when all along, I was just the woman who washed your shirts and cooked your meals while you wrote love letters to someone else." Mark looked away, jaw tight. "It wasn't like that." Caleb appeared in the doorway again, arms crossed, glaring at her. "Mom, stop. Don't do this. You're about to blow up everything over some old journal." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes sharp but not trembling. "No. He blew up everything the moment he decided I wasn't enough. The moment he chose to give his heart away and leave me with the scraps." She drew in a long breath, her shoulders straightening as if a weight had finally slid off her back. Then she said the words that made both men in the room freeze. "I want a divorce." The glass in Mark's hand cracked against the counter as he set it down too hard. His voice dripped with bitterness. "At your age? Do you even hear yourself? Divorce is for the young, Evelyn. Not for people pushing 60. What will you even do with yourself? You wouldn't last a month on your own." Caleb's face flushed with anger. "And what about me? You think this won't ruin everything I've worked for? You're selfish, Mom. You can't even think about how this will affect us." Evelyn's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile but carried the weight of finality. "For 30 years, I thought of nothing but you two. I gave up every dream, every ounce of myself, because I believed that's what a wife and mother was supposed to do. And now, for the first time, I'm going to think about me." The room went silent. Mark's face hardened into stone. Caleb shook his head, muttering to himself in disbelief. But Evelyn didn't waver. For the first time in decades, she felt her voice filling the room, and no one could take it back. She looked at them both, her tone quiet but unshakable. "You told me to know my place. This is my place now, choosing freedom. Whether you approve or not." Mark scoffed, shaking his head as if her words were nothing more than theatrics. Caleb muttered under his breath, pacing the length of the living room like a restless guard dog. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, steady, silent, refusing to shrink. That was when the front door opened. The sound of boots on the hardwood floor pulled their attention. Sarah stepped inside, her coat draped over one arm, her hair damp from the drizzle outside. She stopped when she saw the three of them, her mother standing tall, her father stone-faced, her brother flushed with anger. "What's going on?" she asked carefully, her eyes darting from one to the other. Mark opened his mouth first. "Your mother's lost her mind. She thinks." But Evelyn cut him off, her voice clear, deliberate. "I told them I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Caleb groaned loudly, throwing his hands in the air. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's ruining everything. At her age, of all times." But Sarah didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on her mother, scanning her face, reading the calm resolve etched there. After a moment, Sarah set her coat down on the nearest chair, walked over, and took Evelyn's hand in hers. "If that's what you want," she said softly, "then I'm with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb's mouth fell open. "What? You can't be serious." Sarah turned on him, her voice steady, sharper than Evelyn had ever heard from her daughter. "What's not serious is the way this family has treated Mom. She's not a servant. She's not just background noise while Dad plays professor and you play businessman. She's a human being, and she deserves better than this." Caleb's face reddened, his jaw clenched. "You're choosing her side? After everything Dad has done for us?" Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm choosing the side of truth. The side of respect. The side that doesn't keep a woman chained in silence for 30 years. Mark slammed his hand against the counter, his voice rising for the first time. "Enough. This family doesn't air its dirty laundry. We stay together, no matter what." Evelyn turned toward him, her hand still in Sarah's, her voice calm but unyielding. "No. We survive together when there is love. This," she gestured around the room, at the bitterness and denial, "this isn't survival. This is slow death." Sarah tightened her grip, lifting her mother's hand as though anchoring her. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "If you're ready to leave, I'll walk with you every step." And in that instant, Evelyn felt it, the shift she had been waiting for all her life. One child had tried to bind her to silence. But another, the daughter she had once rocked through storms, now stood as her witness, her ally, her mirror. For the first time in decades, Evelyn didn't just feel like someone's wife, or someone's mother. She felt like herself. The next morning, Evelyn woke before the sun. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the silence of strained walls and unsaid words. She slipped on a simple navy sweater, tied her hair back, and gathered the leather-bound journal into her purse. When she came downstairs, Sarah was already at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She had stayed overnight without asking permission, as if she knew her mother needed more than company, she needed someone to stand in the gap. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked. Evelyn nodded. Her voice was steady. "Yes. Today, it ends." Mark appeared in the hallway, his tie crooked, his face sour with exhaustion. Caleb trailed behind him, rubbing his eyes, glaring at Evelyn as though she were the root of all his problems. "You really mean to go through with this?" Mark asked coldly. "I do," she answered. 30 years is enough." Caleb scoffed. "Do you even hear yourself, Mom? You're going to embarrass us all. What will people say when they find out you left Dad at 60? Evelyn turned her gaze toward him, not angry, not wounded, simply clear. "They'll say I finally found my voice. And if that embarrasses you, then perhaps you've been listening to the wrong people your whole life." Sarah stepped closer to her mother, shielding her from their stares. "Come on, Mom. We're wasting time." The courthouse was only 15 minutes away, but every mile felt like shedding a layer of skin she no longer needed. When they arrived, Evelyn stepped out of the car first, her posture straight, her steps measured. Mark was already there, standing by the entrance, his face lined with disbelief, as though he had never truly believed she would follow through. Inside, the process was brisk, almost clinical. Documents slid across the table, signatures scrawled in black ink. Mark's hand moved quickly, detached, as if he were signing nothing more important than another paper for his students. Evelyn took her time, pressing the pen to each page as though each stroke was carving out her freedom. 20 minutes later, it was done. 30 years dissolved into stamped paper and silent glances. When she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face, warm and unrelenting. For the first time, she didn't feel like shrinking back into the shadows. She inhaled deeply, the air filling her lungs in a way it hadn't in decades. Sarah slipped her arm through hers. "How does it feel?" Evelyn smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling with the weight of it all. "Like I'm breathing for the first time." Caleb's voice cut through the moment, sharp with fury. "Unbelievable. Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed this family. You've destroyed me." Evelyn turned to him slowly. Her voice was calm, her eyes unflinching. "No, Caleb. What destroyed this family were the lies you defended. What destroyed me was silence. But that ends today." She walked past him without hesitation, Sarah at her side. Behind them, Mark lit a cigarette with trembling hands, his face hollow, his future suddenly smaller than he had ever imagined. Evelyn did not look back. Not once. Evelyn and Sarah walked side by side down the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in decades, Evelyn didn't feel trapped inside one. She felt light, untethered, as though invisible chains had finally snapped. Sarah glanced at her mother's profile and smiled. "We should do something to celebrate." Evelyn laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "Celebrate what? That I signed away 30 years of my life?" "No," Sarah said gently. "That you finally claimed the rest of it." They drove downtown, to a small salon Sarah had found on her phone. The owner, a woman Evelyn's age with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile, welcomed them in. When the cape was draped over her shoulders and the scissors whispered through her hair, Evelyn felt something deeper than vanity. With every lock that fell to the floor, she shed years of being invisible. When she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was not the tired wife who had been told to know her place. She was someone new, sharper, freer, alive. Afterward, Sarah tugged her down the street into a boutique. Evelyn hesitated, her instinct to say, "I don't need anything." But Sarah pressed a soft blue dress into her hands, one that made her eyes brighter. "Try it," she insisted. Minutes later, Evelyn stepped out of the fitting room. The dress flowed gently, light as breath, the fabric hugging her body in ways she had long forgotten were possible. Sarah's eyes watered. "You look like yourself again." That evening, they sat in a cafe with steaming mugs of tea. The world outside was noisy, alive with strangers passing by, but inside Evelyn felt a stillness that was new, not the suffocating silence of her old house, but the calm that comes when the noise inside your chest finally quiets. She reached across the table, touched Sarah's hand. "I've been afraid of living alone," she admitted. "But today, when I signed those papers, I realized I wasn't losing a life. I was gaining one." Sarah squeezed her fingers. "Exactly. And it's only just beginning." Later, when Evelyn returned home and walked through the front door, she didn't head to Mark's study. She didn't pause by the family photos on the wall. She went straight to her bedroom window. The evening sky was painted in shades of rose and gold, the kind of sky she had often admired but never allowed herself to claim. She whispered to herself, "Welcome back, Evelyn." And for the first time, the name felt like it truly belonged to her. While Evelyn was rediscovering herself, life in Mark's world began to unravel. It started as whispers on campus. A student journalist published an article hinting at impropriety between a senior professor and a married woman who often appeared at his conferences. The article gained traction, fueled by grainy photos, Mark holding a door for Linda, the two of them dining in a corner booth at an Italian restaurant, laughing too easily, leaning too close. At first, Mark dismissed it as gossip. But the university couldn't. Within days, the dean announced a formal review into his professional conduct. Colleagues who once shook his hand warmly began avoiding him in the hallway. His office door, once a revolving place for students seeking guidance, stayed shut. Linda, too, found herself exposed. Her husband, a retired contractor with quiet dignity, granted one icy interview. "I tolerated her for years," he told a local reporter. "She called it friendship. I called it betrayal." Soon after, he filed for divorce. For a woman who had grown accustomed to wealth and ease, the financial blow was devastating. Her children, distant for years, refused to take her calls. The picture-perfect life she had curated cracked open in public view, leaving her clutching at pieces no one wanted anymore. And then came the worst blow. One night, after a heated argument behind closed doors, Linda shoved Mark in a fit of rage. He stumbled backward, lost his footing, and crashed onto the floor. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was alive, but paralyzed from the waist down. The man who had once stood taller than her, the man who mocked her for being too emotional, was now confined to a wheelchair, stripped of the illusion of control. Evelyn didn't celebrate when she heard the news. She didn't need to. Life had already done what she no longer cared to do, reveal the truth. Mark and Linda's so-called perfect love had decayed into bitterness and ruin. While they sank beneath the weight of their own choices, Evelyn stood at her window one evening, the soft glow of a lamp at her side, and realized something profound: she didn't feel hatred anymore. Only distance. The kind that grows when you finally walk away from a burning house without looking back. The lamp beside her cast a soft circle of light across the room, but Evelyn's gaze was fixed beyond it, on the vast night sky that stretched endlessly above her. Somewhere between the quiet of the stars and the rhythm of her own breathing, she understood what freedom truly meant. For years, she had thought freedom was a door she didn't have the key to. She imagined it as something earned, something granted only if she worked harder, endured longer, gave more. But now she saw the truth: the door had never been locked. She had simply been told to stay inside. Mark and Linda were relics of a past that no longer belonged to her. Their choices had bound them together in misery, while her choice had finally unbound her. Caleb's anger still stung, his harsh words still echoing, but Evelyn knew his bitterness was just another chain she would not wear. One day, he might see her differently. Or he might not. Either way, she would not wait for his approval to live. Sarah's hand on hers earlier that day lingered in her memory, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. But even if she had been, she now understood, solitude was not the enemy. Silence, when chosen, could be peace. She thought of the years she had spent cooking meals no one thanked her for, folding shirts that would only be tossed aside, memorizing the tiny details of everyone else's lives while no one bothered to memorize hers. That life was gone. She would not return to it. Tomorrow, she would book a train ticket. Not because she needed to run, but because she wanted to see something new: mountains, oceans, streets where no one knew her name. She wanted to walk into places as herself, not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but simply Evelyn. At 60, she finally understood that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. She closed her eyes, let out a long, steady breath, and whispered into the quiet. The storm didn't end me. It revealed the world was waiting all along. And with that, she turned away from the window, her steps light, her heart open, ready to live a life that was hers and hers alone.